Hey guys, tonight we explore the chilling whispers that echo from the ancient monasteries, where life is revered but so is death. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and the current time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. There are whispers, faint but clear, that echo through the cloistered halls of forgotten abbeys. In the stillness of the evening, when the wind does not dare to stir the leaves, the sound of old mantras rings through the air. Ancient words that, once spoken, draw the curtain between life and death a little quicker. These words, spoken by monks long dead, have been passed down for generations, preserved in the dusty pages of books never meant to see the light of day. One mantra in particular has been the subject of hushed debates among scholars and holy men alike. It is said to have been uttered at the very moment of a monk's death, as if by design. A cursed chant, Vitae Celeris, they whispered, the swift life. Each repetition, each breath drawn into the recitation, pushes the life of the speaker closer to its inevitable end. The truth, however, lies not in the words, but in the strange binding of time and spirit, woven into the very fabric of the chant. It was discovered in a monastery, so ancient and isolated that even the most dedicated seekers could not trace its roots. The monks of this abbey spoke little, but when they did, their words were heavy with the weight of something older. One such monk, an elder with eyes too dim for sight but sharp with age, recited this mantra every morning, not as an offering to God, but as a daily ritual, one he felt compelled to perform. The older monks, too, had long whispered their suspicions about the chant's curse, but none dared to speak openly. The abbey's chronicles, filled with cryptic verses and the occasional reference to the gift of accelerated passage, left a mystery few were willing to unravel. Some claimed that the chant had been gifted by the ancient gods, meant to bring the spirit closer to the divine in its final moments. Yet others, especially the most devout, whispered that it had a darker origin, that it was not a chant of ascension, but of fall. There were those who, against the elders' warnings, began to experiment with the chant, repeating it with fervor, hoping for a quicker end to their suffering or a glimpse into the mysteries of the afterlife. What they did not realize was that the mantra did not simply shorten their lives. It bound them to the monastery's fate, a fate where every recitation brought them one step closer to death's embrace. Their skin, once vibrant, began to wither, their eyes dulled as though drained of light. And yet they continued, reciting, always reciting, drawn to the chant's bitter allure. And then there were the texts, hidden deep within the monastery's crumbling walls, forgotten books that had survived centuries of destruction. One such manuscript, which was nearly consumed by time itself, told the story of a monk named Brother Calum, who was said to have lived through an entire century. His secret? The daily recitation of the chant. Yet, in the final pages of his journal, it was revealed that his body, although it had outlasted many generations, had also decayed more rapidly than any mortals should. The truth was chilling. Time had twisted itself around him, consuming him not only in years but in fragments of soul. Each repetition of the chant stole away parts of his essence, shortening his span without mercy. The monastery's fall, which no one truly understood, occurred when a curious scholar, one who dared to decipher the forbidden texts, uncovered the full extent of the curse. His body began to age, and with it his mind slowly unraveled. He too became a prisoner of the chant. The monks, desperate to stop the plague of early death that had gripped their abbey, attempted to burn the manuscript, but it was too late. The ritual was already in motion, a cycle too tightly wound to escape. Yet some claim that Brother Calum never truly died. He was seen, long after the abbey had been abandoned, walking through the halls, his form a ghostly shadow, endlessly, whispering the same chant over and over, always pulling time closer to its end. The chant, they say, does not die. It lingers, waiting for the next soul to pick up the thread. Even now, in the forgotten corners of the world, there are those who stumble upon the remnants of this curse. They find themselves reciting words they don't fully understand, words that seem to call out to them from the dark, words that bring a strange pull on their very being. And like the monks of old, they feel the weight of the chant growing heavier with each passing day. If you are still with me, listener, you might feel a pull of curiosity or fear, but do not be so eager to know the full extent of the curse, for it is not a gift to be taken lightly. The monks of the abbey did not survive it, and neither it seems will you. Hey, are you still here? Good. You should be listening closely now. Once you enter the realm of these ancient mantras, the walls close in, the cloisters become shadows, and the whispers, oh, they never stop. They murmur to you from the darkness, calling you by name even though you never spoke a word. Before you proceed, pause for a moment. Take a breath and listen to the sounds around you. Is there something you're hearing, a subtle hum in the air? Perhaps it's the stirring of the wind, but if you feel that chill running up your spine, if the hairs on the back of your neck rise as if in response to a sound barely discernible, then perhaps you too have begun to hear the whispers. When you tread in the footsteps of the monks who once wandered these ancient halls, you begin to understand what they felt. The words they spoke, and the words they didn't speak, had an odd weight, didn't they? Some of the monks had a strange look about them too, eyes clouded and blank as though they were constantly listening for something just beyond the veil, something their mortal ears couldn't fully comprehend. It was in the deep recesses of these monasteries that the whispers first began, soft, fleeting murmurs of incantations passed down through the centuries. They were often shared in the dead of night, when the monks were supposed to be at rest, their bodies lying still in the silence of sleep. Yet even in those moments of supposed tranquility, the monks' minds were never quiet. The mantra, murmured softly at first, began to grow louder and louder, reverberating throughout the monastery until it seemed as though the very walls themselves were speaking. Perhaps you've heard this before in the myths, the idea that the walls of a sacred place absorb every prayer, every whispered word, every prayer to a higher power. But here, within the cloistered halls, it wasn't just the prayers that were absorbed. It was also the curses, the mantras, and the words meant to call forth death itself. Some believed the monastery was a place where time itself could be bent, but not by those who wanted to manipulate it. No, the monks here were not magicians or charlatans. They were humble, devout men bound to a higher calling. But in their devotion, they had forgotten one crucial truth. The power of the mantra, once spoken, could not be easily undone. For generations, the monks of this abbey had recited mantras to speed up their journey to enlightenment, all unaware that in their efforts to shorten their path to divinity, they were actually hastening their journey into death. But how could they have known? They were taught that all life was impermanent, that even their suffering was but a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of eternity. What they didn't realize was that each mantra was a thread woven into a larger tapestry, a tapestry in which their fates were already sealed. You may be wondering, what exactly did they whisper? What were these words that once spoken had such profound consequences? Some records, though old and worn, speak of a single phrase repeated over and over again. Eterna vita brevis. Translated, it means eternal life is brief. This was the first clue to the curse, the truth hidden in plain sight. They were seeking eternity, but their time was slipping away with every breath, every utterance of the sacred words. But what makes this particular curse so strange and so dangerous is that it wasn't the monks who fully understood its power. There were outsiders too. Those who visited the monastery, whether they were wandering pilgrims or scholars seeking enlightenment, heard the whispers. They too would come under the influence of the words, seduced by the allure of immortality, yet unaware of the cost. The monks' chants became infectious. Those who spent too much time near the monastery felt their hearts race with anticipation, eager to join in, to become part of the whispered ritual. It is said that a certain scholar, a young man full of ambition and curiosity, visited the monastery during the winter of 1523. He came seeking wisdom, but left with more than he bargained for. The monks, ever gracious, offered him hospitality and access to their sacred texts. He was a man of science, a man who believed only in logic, but even he could not escape the pull of their voices. One evening, as he was studying by candlelight, he heard the chanting for the first time. It was faint at first, just a murmur in the background, but then it grew louder, filling the air until it seemed as if it surrounded him. The words crept into his mind, even though he tried to resist. Eterna vita brevis. The scholar attempted to dismiss it, to focus on his studies, but the words, like an invisible hand, seemed to reach for him, wrapping themselves around his thoughts. And then something happened. His breath quickened. His skin grew cold. It felt as though his heart had skipped a beat. Time, his precious time, began to feel more distant. The hours that had once passed in a blur now stretched out like an eternity. He looked down at his hands, and there, just for a moment, he thought they appeared older, more wrinkled, as if the years had suddenly caught up to him. The scholar's mind raced. He realized that he had unwittingly joined the chant. But by then it was too late. He had become another voice in the chorus. The monks had warned him, but he hadn't been listening. Now he was trapped in a loop, a circle of time from which there was no escape. He left the monastery the next morning, but his journey was no longer his own. His body aged unnaturally fast, his mind unraveling with each passing day. The man who had once been full of promise and ambition became a shadow of his former self, as though time had claimed him long before his time had come. The curse of the mantra had taken hold. And now, as you sit here listening, it is almost impossible not to wonder, do you hear it too? Those faint, ancient whispers, reaching out through the years, seeking someone else to take the final step, to join the chorus, to become one with the chant. Ah, do you hear it now? The air is thick with the weight of those who have come before you, those who, like you, thought themselves untouched by the whispers, only to fall victim to them. But this is no ordinary tale. This is the tale of the Silent Sisterhood, a group of women whose lives were defined by silence, yet whose deaths were shaped by words, words no one should ever utter. Long ago, there was a convent nestled in a remote valley, far from the bustling world, where a group of nuns devoted themselves to lives of prayer and meditation. Their vows, like those of any devoted woman of the cloth, were strict: silence, humility, and devotion to the sacred texts. But there was a hidden truth to their silence, one far more unsettling than any vow of quietude. It is said that the Silent Sisterhood was not just a religious order, but a coven of sorts, bound not only by their faith but by an ancient secret passed down through generations. Their leader, Abbess Seraphina, was not just a woman of profound piety, but a woman of incredible power, who had unlocked something, some forbidden knowledge, that allowed her to manipulate the flow of time itself. How? The answer lies in the very mantras the nuns spoke in their most sacred rituals, mantras they believed could bring them closer to God. These mantras, however, had a darker side, a side that none of the nuns fully understood. It was only later, after the convent's ruin, that their whispered words were deciphered, revealing a terrible truth. Each phrase, each prayer, shortened their lives just as the monks' chant did, but not in the same way. For these women, their time was not merely stolen. It was redirected, drawn into an endless cycle of rebirth that they could never escape. The key to this strange manipulation of time lay in a particular prayer, one of the oldest in their order. It began with a single word, ego, which means I. This word, repeated over and over again, was said to force the speaker to confront their own existence, their own self. But the true power of the mantra was in the way it twisted the very concept of time. With each utterance, the speaker was forced to live through a moment, again and again, until the moment became all-consuming. In the beginning, this practice seemed harmless, an exercise in reflection and self-awareness. But over time, the nuns began to realize that they were no longer living these moments. They were trapped within them. The prayer, once said to bring them closer to God, now left them suspended in an endless loop. Their bodies continued to age, but their spirits were drawn into a realm where time itself held no sway. Abbess Serafina, it is said, was the first to truly understand the consequences of their actions. She was the one who discovered that they had not merely shortened their lives, they had trapped their souls in a cycle that would never end. The longer the chant was repeated, the more fragmented the nuns became, like shards of glass caught in an unbreakable cycle. The most troubling part of their silence, however, was that no one outside the convent ever noticed. The nuns continued their duties as if nothing had changed. Visitors, pilgrims, and scholars who came to the convent for guidance saw only the serene faces of women who seemed to exist outside of time, untouched by the suffering of the world. But those who stayed too long, those who listened too closely, heard the faint echoes of the mantra drifting through the halls at night. Many who came in search of wisdom left in confusion, some even claiming that their own sense of time had begun to warp, leaving them unsettled and unsure of the passing days. One such visitor was a young monk named Brother Eloy. He was new to the monastic life, filled with the fervor of youth, but when he arrived at the convent, something about it unsettled him deeply. He heard the whispers. At first they were subtle, indistinct, but they became clearer the longer he stayed. He became obsessed with the strange power the nuns seemed to possess, how they never seemed to age, how they existed in a perpetual state of calm. But when he finally overheard a fragment of the prayer, ego, his curiosity took a darker turn. One night, unable to sleep, Brother Eloy wandered the convent's corridors, drawn by an irresistible force. It was there in the stillness of the night that he found himself standing before the abbey's inner chamber, where the sisters performed their most sacred rituals. He could hear them inside, chanting softly, their voices blending in a haunting harmony. Unable to resist, Eloy stepped closer, his heart racing. He could hear the words clearly now. Ego, ego, ego. For a moment the chanting stopped. The nuns were silent, but Eloy, drawn by an unexplainable force, entered the chamber. What he saw left him forever altered. The nuns, standing in their habitual silence, appeared unchanged by the passage of time, but their eyes, oh, their eyes, were empty, lifeless, as though their souls had long since been consumed by the mantra. Abbess. Serafina's voice broke the stillness. "You've come to witness it, haven't you?" she whispered. Her eyes, too, were vacant, yet there was a flicker of recognition in them. "You've heard the chant, Brother Eloy. It has begun. You are one of us now." The monk stumbled back, horrified. He tried to leave, but the door slammed shut, trapping him inside. It was then that Eloy understood. The chant was not merely a prayer. It was a trap, and he had walked straight into it. The nuns, trapped in an endless loop of repetition, could never leave, and now neither could he. The last thing he heard before his mind was consumed by the mantra was Abbess Serafina's voice, faint but resolute. "We are the silent sisterhood, and now you are too." The convent was abandoned shortly thereafter, its once pristine walls now echoing only with the faint whispers of a past that no one could truly understand. The story of the silent sisterhood was lost to history, but the whispers of the ego chant still linger, drifting through the corners of the world, seeking someone else to join the cycle. If you listen closely, you might hear it. And if you dare, you might even join them. You feel it, don't you? That tightness in your chest, the strange pull that draws you deeper into the story, closer to the fate of the monks and nuns who walked the same path before you. They took their vows, swore their sacred oaths, and believed that through their devotion, they would transcend the world's cruelty. But as their words echoed through the halls of their monasteries, little did they know that the oaths themselves were cursed, binding them not to salvation, but to death. The oath, at first glance, seems innocent enough. "I shall serve," they would say. "I shall give my life in service to the divine." Each monk, each nun, made this vow in the dim light of the chapel, their faces solemn as the candle flames flickered around them. In those moments, it was easy to believe that the path of devotion was pure and righteous, that their sacrifices would lead them to eternal peace. But the truth, as always, is far darker. It wasn't just the devotion that sealed their fate. It was the words of the oath itself, the language they spoke, the mantras they repeated during their solemn vows. These words, simple and sacred, had been woven together long ago, written by a scholar whose name has since been lost to time. But it's said that the scholar was cursed himself, a man who thought too deeply on the nature of time and life. One of the lesser-known secrets of the monastic life is that in order to bind themselves to their vows, monks and nuns used words not only to profess their faith, but also to bind themselves to the temporal flow of the world. The scholar understood that time could be manipulated, not through power or magic, but through language. Language, after all, is the key to understanding reality. Every word shapes the world around us, bends it, changes it. The scholar wrote a prayer that was to be used during the sacred oath, a prayer meant to bind the soul of the monk to the divine. But in his obsession, the scholar crafted a prayer that did more than bind the soul. It bound the monk's life to a cycle of constant sacrifice, stripping away moments from their lifespan with every word spoken. What the monks did not know was that with every oath they swore, they were not pledging their loyalty only to God. They were offering pieces of their own life, slowly but inexorably giving up their years. The words themselves carried an ancient curse, passed down by the scholar who had in his madness believed that only by shortening the life of the speaker could the soul be made pure enough to enter the divine presence. In the monastery's records, there is a passage that speaks of this, though the exact meaning has been lost to the decay of time. It's a cryptic verse, but the translation reads something like this: "Each oath spoken is an hour lost from the life of the one who speaks it." No one ever took this warning seriously, of course. The monks believed they were giving up their lives in service to something greater, something eternal. But what they didn't realize was that every vow they took was drawing them closer to their death, one word at a time. And so it was, generation after generation, that the monks grew older, faster than they should have. The abbeys became filled with men whose bodies had aged prematurely, their faces lined with the marks of time, their hands trembling from the toll of their oaths. Some monks, in desperation, tried to break the cycle, praying harder, fasting longer, hoping that their sacrifice would be enough to undo the damage they had done with their vows. But it was no use. The words had been spoken. The curse had been set in motion. It is said that a particular monk, Brother Cian, was the first to truly understand the cost of the oaths. He had been the youngest monk in the abbey, full of life and potential, but as he recited his sacred vows, he felt something strange, a pull like a thread being drawn from his chest. At first it was subtle. His hair began to gray. His muscles grew weaker. But the true horror came when one night, while meditating alone in the chapel, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something deep inside him had cracked. The pain, though unbearable, did not kill him. Instead, it forced him to face the reality of his situation. The more he meditated on the oaths he had taken, the more he understood their true meaning. He realized that each vow was a sacrifice, not to God, but to time itself. The monks were not promised eternal life. They were promised only an eternity of shortened moments. And so Brother Cian did the unthinkable. He broke his oath. He defied the sacred words, daring to speak a new mantra that was not of devotion but of release. Tempus revertitur, he whispered, meaning, time returns. For a brief moment, time did indeed shift. The weight that had pressed on his chest lifted, his body returned to a state of youth, and the years seemed to peel away from his face. But it was fleeting. The moment was a fragile illusion. The monks who overheard him began to whisper that the curse could not be undone. that to break the sacred vow was to invite even worse fate. They feared the wrath of God for the sacrilege, and soon, Brother Cian's once hopeful journey ended in exile. The abbey shut its doors to him, casting him out into the world, where he wandered as a broken man, too old for his years, his life stripped from him by the very vows he had taken. The sacred oaths, you see, were not just words. They were chains. Chains that held the monks in a slow, relentless march toward death, each vow tightening the noose around their necks. And though Brother Cian had broken the cycle, it was only by sacrificing his soul in the process. So, listener, think carefully about the words you speak. Be wary of promises made in haste, for the more you offer, the more you may find your life slipping away, unnoticed, until it is too late to turn back. The hourglass, they say, is a symbol of time, each grain of sand falling like a heartbeat marking the inevitable march toward death. But have you ever wondered, listener, if the hourglass could be more than that? Could it be a trap? A false promise of time, counting down toward eternity but never quite reaching it? In the ancient monasteries, tucked away in forgotten corners of the world, there existed a peculiar ritual, a mantra that, when spoken, could supposedly extend one's life. But, like all things tied to time, this mantra came with its own curse. The monks who spoke it were not seeking to cheat death. No, they were not so audacious. Instead, they sought to understand death, to control it, or at least to delay it long enough to uncover the hidden truths of the universe. It was a mantra, passed down from generation to generation, meant to stretch the life of the speaker, to give them the extra years needed to unlock the secrets of their spiritual devotion. The words of the mantra are lost now. Only fragments remain, hidden in old texts, too brittle to touch. But there is one word, one phrase that still lingers, whispered among those who dare to seek it. Vita aeterna, mora tenuis. Eternal life, fragile delay. It is a phrase that speaks of immortality, yet warns of its fleeting nature, as if to say, even in eternity, time will slip away. The monks believed that reciting the mantra allowed them to transcend the natural laws of mortality. With each recitation, the sands of the hourglass slowed, or so they thought. Their bodies, once racked with the inevitable decay of time, seemed to resist. The wrinkles on their skin faded, their back straightened, their breath grew easier. But this respite, this illusion of life extended, came at a great cost. You see, the mantra did not extend their lives in the way they expected. No, it did not grant them an endless existence, nor did it keep them forever youthful. Instead, it made their lives stretch, as though time itself were being manipulated, stretched thin like the strands of a spider's web. The monks lived long enough to see their own spirits fragment. Their minds grew distant, as if the very essence of who they were had been siphoned off, pulled into the past and the future, never quite existing in the present. Each time they recited the mantra, the hourglass slowed. But the more they spoke the words, the further they slipped from reality. It is said that the monks would stand before their hourglasses, watching the sands fall, whispering the mantra under their breath, feeling themselves growing older, yet somehow frozen in time. They became haunted by their own memories, slipping in and out of moments long past, living in an endless loop of unfinished thoughts. Brother Aurelius was one of the most famous of these monks, a man who, by all accounts, should have died at least 50 years before he did. He was a scholar, a devoted monk with a thirst for knowledge, and like the others, he discovered the mantra that promised to extend his life. But it was not the life he had expected. For Brother Aurelius, time became a prison. He lived in what some would call a timeless moment, a state where the years were endless, but his body still decayed. He would sit in the abbey's library, surrounded by books that seemed to grow older around him, yet he did not age. His face remained youthful, but his eyes grew dull, his thoughts scattered. The monks, as they watched him, grew fearful. They would see him stare into the flames, murmuring to himself, "I do not wish for this anymore," he would whisper, his voice trembling. But the mantra, Vita aeterna, mora tenuis, had already taken its hold. No matter how much he yearned for release, the words had bound him to the endless stretch of time. The true horror of the mantra came to light one fateful evening when Brother Aurelius, desperate to break free, sought out the abbey's ancient texts to find a way to undo the damage. There, hidden in the darkest corner of the library, he found a passage that was not written in any language he had ever seen before. It was a cryptic set of symbols, a language older than the monastery itself. With trembling hands, he recited the words aloud, hoping they would release him from the grip of the mantra. But as the words left his mouth, something horrific happened. The room around him seemed to dissolve. Time itself warped, bending like a mirror cracked in half. The once sturdy walls of the abbey began to crack and crumble, the sands in the hourglass spinning wildly. Brother Aurelius screamed, only to find that the sound of his voice echoed back at him from all directions. It was not a release, not a return to normality. It was a descent. The mantra had not only extended his life, it had fractured his very being, pulling him across the fabric of time, scattering him into countless pieces, each one trapped in a moment that no longer existed. Some say that Brother Aurelius still exists, not in one body, but in many. His voice echoes in the halls of the abbey, his form a shadow of something that was never meant to be. His existence has become the very thing he feared most, an endless stretching of moments with no way to return to the present, no way to escape the curse of immortality that he had foolishly sought. The monks who heard of Brother Aurelius's fate became terrified of the mantra, and soon the monastery's doors were sealed shut. The hourglass was destroyed, its sand scattered, and the mantra was lost to the annals of time. Yet there are those who believe that the mantra still exists, hidden away in forgotten texts, waiting for another soul to stumble upon it. Perhaps it is fate's cruelest irony, that those who seek to extend their lives are often the first to realize that time, once twisted, cannot be returned to its proper place. It only pulls them deeper into its grasp, stretching them thin until they are lost, scattered across the timeline like forgotten fragments. And so, listener, beware the hourglass. Beware the words that stretch time. For once you speak them, you might never find your way back. There is something unnerving about the final breath. It is the last mark of life, the final seal on the passage of time. And yet, oh yet, there are those who seek to harness it, to capture it. For them, the final breath is not a surrender, but a tool, a key to unlocking hidden doors that should remain closed. In the dim-lit corners of the abbeys, whispers of a ritual have survived the centuries. A ritual so ancient, so forbidden, that it was said to have been sealed by the monks themselves for fear that its power could not be contained. This ritual was meant to gather the very essence of death, the last breath, and with it draw from it the power to transcend mortality. The monks, in their quest for understanding the mysteries of life and death, had come to understand that the final breath of a dying man or woman held a unique power. It was the moment when the soul departed, leaving the body behind, and they believed that within this breath, a sacred energy could be captured, a fragment of the soul itself, still tethered to the mortal world. The ritual was simple in its design, but terrifying in its implications. At the moment of death, the monks would gather around the dying, their breath slow and heavy, their voices rising in a whispered prayer. Vitae extrema, they would chant. The end of life is but a threshold. They would call this moment the threshold, for it marked the point between the living and the dead, where the veil between the two realms was thinnest. But the monks were not merely praying for the soul to pass through. They were trying to capture the last breath itself. The monk at the center of the ritual would lean close to the dying person, their hands poised just above the chest, waiting for the final exhale. And when it came, when that last breath was drawn, the monk would inhale it. At first, the monks believed this to be a holy act. The breath of the dead was thought to carry, with it the wisdom of the deceased, a fragment of their spirit that could enlighten the living. They believed that by absorbing the last breath, they could commune with the dead, perhaps even gain the knowledge that was once locked within the mind of the departed. But of course there was a price. There is always a price. The first monk to attempt this, a man named Brother Septimus, was one of the abbey's most devout. He had long been fascinated by the mystery of death, having studied every text on the afterlife that the monastery possessed. He was convinced that the soul's departure held more than just a promise of heaven or hell. It held secrets of the divine, secrets that the living could never know unless they bridged that final gap. And so, one fateful night, Brother Septimus performed the ritual alone. The abbey was quiet, the winds outside howling, and the dying man, a sick monk who had long struggled with fever, lay before him, gasping for breath. The other monks, too tired to rise from their cells, had no idea what Brother Septimus intended. With trembling hands, Brother Septimus recited the sacred words, drawing closer to the monk's chest. As the last breath left the dying man, Brother Septimus leaned forward and inhaled, pulling the air deep into his lungs. At first, nothing seemed to happen. There was no flash of light, no divine revelation. Brother Septimus felt only the lingering taste of the air in his mouth, bitter and cold. But as the minutes passed, he began to feel an odd sensation, a creeping cold, starting at the base of his spine and slowly working its way through his body. He thought it was nothing more than a reaction to the death he had just witnessed. But soon he realized it was something far worse. The last breath of the dying monk had not simply filled his lungs, it had filled his soul. Brother Septimus could feel it, an overwhelming weight, a suffocating presence pressing in from all directions. It was as though the man's spirit had attached itself to his own, fusing with it, twisting it into something that was not entirely human. Days passed, and Brother Septimus found himself slipping away from reality. His thoughts grew confused, disjointed. He would wake in the night, gasping for air, feeling as though he could never catch his breath. Sometimes, he would hear whispers, soft, indistinct murmurs in the corners of his mind, as though the dead monk was speaking to him from beyond the grave. But the whispers were not kind. They were filled with anger, regret, and a longing for something that could not be undone. The other monks began to notice changes in Brother Septimus. He would speak of visions, terrifying, vivid images of a darkened realm. He spoke of places that no living man had seen, of beings who were not quite human yet not quite dead. His body, too, began to show signs of decay. His skin grew pale and tight, his eyes sunken and hollow. The ritual, it seemed, had not gifted him with divine wisdom as he had hoped. Instead, it had cursed him, binding him to the dead monk's spirit, making him something less than human, something caught between life and death. The monks, horrified by the change in their brother, attempted to perform a cleansing ritual. But nothing could sever the bond between Brother Septimus and the spirit he had absorbed. The last breath had taken root within him, and there was no turning back. In the final days of his life, Brother Septimus wandered the abbey, speaking to shadows, muttering incomprehensible phrases. His body seemed to wither away, his once strong frame reduced to a gaunt, trembling figure. He was no longer alive in any true sense. He had become a vessel for the dead, a conduit for the souls of those who passed through the abbey, their spirits now trapped in the same prison that had claimed his own. When Brother Septimus died, there was no peaceful passing, no quiet slipping away into the afterlife. Instead, he was consumed by the breath he had taken. His body crumbled into dust, and the monks who found him could not even recognize his remains. Only the faint, cold scent of death lingered in the room where he had died, a reminder of the price he had paid for his greed. The ritual of the last breath was forbidden after that night. The monks, who once believed they could cheat death, now feared it more than ever. The abbey closed its doors, and the secret of the last breath faded into obscurity, lost to the winds of time. Yet there are still whispers, faint and distant, of a monk who wanders the earth, his soul tethered to the dead, cursed to never find peace. And if you listen carefully, perhaps you'll hear the soft rustle of his breath, just before it slips away once more. The abbey was quiet, save for the soft rustle of parchment. But even in this silence, there were secrets waiting to be uncovered. You see, not all the books held by the monks were sacred. Not all of them were blessed with the intent to guide the soul to salvation. Some contained truths too terrible for any mortal mind to grasp. Truths about the world, about time, about death itself. And one of these tomes, now long forgotten, was said to hold the key to a secret that could unravel the fabric of existence. It is a curious thing, isn't it, that the most dangerous knowledge is often the most elusive? The monks knew of this. How a single book, left untouched, could outlast entire generations. It was no accident that some of the abbey's deepest chambers were sealed, locked away with the most cryptic of warnings. But even in the face of such warnings, there were always those who could not resist the pull of the unknown, those who dared to venture into forbidden spaces. One such man was Brother Quintus, a monk whose curiosity knew no bounds. His zeal for understanding the mysteries of life and death was unmatched by any of his peers. He had spent his days studying ancient texts, unraveling the arcane and esoteric knowledge hidden within the abbey's walls. Yet it was not enough. No matter how much he learned, no matter how many hours he spent in prayer and study, he felt as if something was missing, a piece of the puzzle that he could never quite find. And then one night, during his nightly studies, he stumbled upon something that should never have been discovered. It was a small, dust-covered book, hidden deep within a forgotten corner of the abbey's library. Its leather binding was cracked and worn, its pages yellowed with age. There were no markings on the cover, no title, nothing to suggest its importance. But something about it called to Brother Quintus. Something about the weight of the book in his hands stirred something deep within him. With trembling fingers, he opened the tome. The first page was blank, save for a single phrase written in a script that was unfamiliar, even to him. Veritas tenebris, it read. The truth in darkness. As Brother Quintus turned the pages, he felt the air grow colder. The words seemed to shift before his eyes, rearranging themselves into something alive, something that did not belong in the realm of the living. And as he read, a terrible realization washed over him. This was no ordinary book. It was a grimoire, a cursed tome that held within it the very essence of darkness. The truth within its pages was not meant for the living. It was not meant for anyone who sought to escape death, nor for anyone who wished to unravel the mysteries of the afterlife. This book was meant to consume the reader, to bind their soul to the words, to the darkness contained within its pages. And as Brother Quintus read on, he could feel himself being drawn deeper into its grip. The book told of a ritual, one that would allow the reader to reach beyond the veil of death, to speak to those who had long passed. But there was a catch, a price that no one could afford to pay. The ritual required the reader to give something precious, something that could never be returned. At first, Brother Quintus thought it was a test, a mere challenge to his faith. He had always believed that sacrifice was necessary in the pursuit of knowledge. But as he continued reading, he understood the true nature of the ritual. It was not just a sacrifice, it was an exchange. In order to reach beyond the veil of death, the reader had to give up a piece of their own soul. Brother Quintus hesitated. He understood the implications of what he was about to do, but the hunger for knowledge, the desire to uncover the mysteries of life and death, overcame his fear. He followed the instructions in the book, carefully preparing for the ritual. As the ritual began, he chanted the words written in the book, his voice trembling but steady. The air around him grew thick, as if the very atmosphere were becoming charged with an unseen force. The candle flames flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as he spoke the final incantation, he felt a sharp, cold pain pierce his chest. At that moment, something shifted. The walls of the abbey seemed to tremble. The air grew thick with the scent of decay. A deep, inhuman voice echoed in his mind. You have called me. You have summoned that which should remain forgotten. Brother Quintus tried to scream, but no sound came out. His body was frozen, his limbs stiff with fear. The darkness in the room seemed to deepen, pulling him toward it, drowning him in its cold embrace. He could hear the whispers of the dead, distant voices that called to him from beyond the veil. And then in the distance he saw it. A figure, standing just outside the reach of the candlelight. It was not human. It was something else, something ancient, something that had never known life. The figure was bound in shadow, its form shifting, flickering like a candle's flame in the fire, wind. And then, the voice spoke again, this time more clearly, more forcefully. "You seek to know the truth," it said, "but the truth is a poison, and once consumed, it will never be undone." Brother Quintus tried to break free, to run, but it was too late. The moment he had crossed the threshold of the ritual, his fate was sealed. His soul was no longer his own. It had been claimed by the book, by the dark force that now stood before him. The abbey's walls trembled once more, and the figure seemed to dissolve into the shadows. The air returned to stillness, but the damage had been done. Brother Quintus was never seen again. The book, too, vanished, as though it had never existed at all. But those who came after him reported strange occurrences, whispers in the halls, flickering candlelight, and the faint sound of footsteps in the night. The book, they say, is still out there, hidden in the deepest corners of the world, waiting for someone else to stumble upon it. And when they do, they will learn the truth. But by then it will be too late. The truth, you see, is never meant to be uncovered. It is a darkness that swallows those who seek it, leaving only whispers behind. The prayer, so simple in its words, is ancient, far older than the stones that have witnessed the passing of centuries. It was first uttered by an unnamed monk in the early days of the monasteries, long before their rise to power, long before the great libraries and the vast halls filled with knowledge. The prayer, known only by a few and spoken by even fewer, has endured the tests of time, passed from one generation to the next, whispered in the silence of midnight vigils. But it was not always regarded as a prayer of comfort or devotion. In fact, it was often referred to as the mortal prayer, a prayer that sought to bind the one who uttered it to the very mortal coil, a prayer that touched upon the very nature of life and death. It was said that those who spoke it would feel the weight of their existence in a way no one else could. It was a prayer meant to confront one's mortality, to face the truth of one's fragile, fleeting life. The first known record of the prayer appears in a manuscript found in the ruins of an abbey on the outskirts of the ancient kingdom of Gaul. This manuscript, now lost to history, described the prayer as a means of understanding the cycle of life, of embracing death without fear. But what it failed to mention, what no one spoke of until much later, was that the prayer also had the power to accelerate death. The more often it was spoken, the closer it brought the speaker to the inevitable end. The monks, when they first discovered this prayer, thought it to be a tool for enlightenment, a way to purge the soul of attachment to the mortal world. They did not know, could not have known, the true cost of speaking it. The more the prayer was recited, the more time it took from the speaker's life. It was a paradox, a prayer that sought to bring peace by stripping away the years of life itself. One monk, Brother Adalric, became obsessed with it. He was a young man, eager for understanding, seeking the wisdom that had eluded him in his earlier years. He spent countless hours in the monastery's library, poring over ancient texts, deciphering forgotten languages. And it was there, in a dusty corner of the library, that he found the prayer. At first, Brother Adalric recited the prayer only in secret, unsure of its power. But as he did, he began to feel something strange, a weight lifting from his heart, a sense of clarity that he had never known. The prayer, he believed, was a gift from the divine meant to free him from the burden of his own mortality. But soon, the effects of the prayer became undeniable. As the days passed, he felt himself growing weaker, his body growing frail, his mind growing distant. The more he recited the prayer, the faster time seemed to slip away from him. His once young face became haggard, his hands trembling with age, despite his years being few. And yet, in his mind, he was no longer fearful. The prayer had granted him a peace that few ever found. He shared his discovery with the other monks, telling them of the comfort he had found in the mortal prayer. But what Brother Adalric failed to mention, what he could not have known, was that this comfort came at a price. Those who followed his example began to feel the same effects. The monks grew ill, their bodies aging at an unnatural rate, their minds clouded with the knowledge of their impending death. They had embraced the prayer, but in doing so, they had embraced the very thing it sought to deny, their own mortality. The monastery's once vibrant halls grew silent. The monks, once filled with energy and purpose, now moved like shadows, their bodies frail and broken, their spirits lost in the endless echo of the prayer. They were all bound to it now, trapped in a cycle of life and death, each recitation drawing them closer to the end. And still the prayer was spoken. Over and over it echoed in the halls of the abbey. The monks could not stop it, could not free themselves from the grip of the words. It had become a part of them, as if the prayer had taken root in their very souls. As time passed, the abbey was abandoned. The monks, now nothing more than ghostly remnants of the men they once were, vanished into the ether, their bodies withered beyond recognition. And yet, the prayer remained. It was said that the last monk to leave the abbey, the final survivor of that ill-fated order, could still be heard late at night, whispering the prayer to himself as he wandered the empty halls. His voice, though frail and weak, carried the weight of centuries, the burden of the countless lives lost to the prayer. The prayer itself, though spoken in ancient tongues, still lingers in the corners of forgotten libraries, in the hidden alcoves of ruined monasteries. There are those who say that it is waiting for someone else to speak it, to utter the words that bind them to the inevitable truth of their mortality. And if you listen closely enough, you might hear the echoes of the mortal prayer calling to you. Perhaps you too could find peace in its words. Or perhaps, like the monks before you, it would cost you more than you could ever imagine. There is a truth that only the wise or the foolish truly understand. Words can be poison. They can seep into your soul like a slow-moving river, gradually wearing away the boundaries of your sanity, twisting your thoughts, and leaving you helpless against their pull. The monks, in their devotion to the divine and their thirst for wisdom, discovered this truth far too late, buried deep within the pages of an ancient text. In the abbey's library, there existed a manuscript so old, so cryptic that even the monks were hesitant to speak of it. Bound in dark leather, its pages stained with the ink of forgotten prayers, the book was rarely touched, its secrets kept hidden from all but the most daring souls. Among the pages was a verse, seemingly innocuous, an elegant passage from a lost language. But it was not the translation that was dangerous. It was the sound of the words themselves, the rhythm they carried. The verse, when spoken aloud, had a curious effect. The monks who first encountered it believed it to be a simple prayer, meant to invoke peace or protection. They were wrong. It began with a single harmonious line, spoken in a calm, almost soothing tone. Lumen tenebris, vita in morte. Light in the darkness, life in death. On the surface, it seemed a prayer of hope, an invocation to find light amid despair, life amid death. But as they repeated the words, slowly, carefully as the book instructed, they began to notice something strange. The more they spoke it, the more they felt a growing unease, a sense of discomfort, a gnawing sensation at the edges of their consciousness crept into their minds. Brother Theron, the first monk to utter the verse aloud, reported the first symptoms. At first it was subtle. He felt a warmth spreading through his body, an odd sense of clarity, like he was seeing the world in sharper detail. But then, something darker began to unfold. He began to hear voices, soft, indistinct murmurs in the background, whispering in a language he could not understand. His vision blurred, and a deep, gnawing hunger gripped him, though he could not say for what. The more he recited the verse, the more the whispers grew. The voices were no longer whispers. They were commands, demanding his attention, urging him to speak the verse again and again. The once calming verse had become an obsession, and soon Brother Theron could no longer think of anything else. He returned to the book, desperate for answers. There, within the pages, he found the true nature of the verse. It was not a prayer at all. It was a poison, a spell that warped the mind, twisted the spirit, and bound the reader to something far darker than any mortal soul should ever encounter. The verse, when spoken repeatedly, would bind the speaker's life force to the words, drawing energy from the world around them, feeding on the very essence of time itself. The longer the verse was recited, the more the speaker's vitality would drain. Their body would grow weaker, their thoughts more fragmented, and their very soul would be consumed, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the hollow echo of the words. Brother Theron, realizing too late the horror he had unleashed, sought to stop. But the verse had taken hold. His body withered as his mind unraveled, and he found himself unable to escape the cycle. The verse, once spoken, became a part of him. The more he resisted, the more it consumed him. It was said that on the night of his death, Brother Theron was found in the abbey's chapel, standing before the altar, his mouth still moving, reciting the cursed verse even as his body crumbled to dust. His last breath, his final moment, was a mere echo of the words he had spoken so many times before. And with that breath, the verse claimed its final toll. But the verse did not end with his death. No, it lived on. The monks, now terrified of the power the verse held, sealed the book away, hiding it in the deepest vaults of the abbey. They tried to forget it, to ignore the poison that had once taken Brother Theron, but it was no use. The verse had taken root, and like a weed, it began to grow again. It is said that those who have dared to seek the book, driven by curiosity or a desire to understand the true nature of the verse, have felt its pull. It is a subtle thing, at first, a whisper at the edge of your consciousness, a strange sense of unease. But as you draw nearer to the book, the whispers grow louder, the words become clearer, and you find yourself compelled to speak them. The last known person to encounter the book was a scholar who, in his obsession with uncovering ancient secrets, ventured to the ruins of the abbey. He found the vault, opened the book, and, without hesitation, began to read the cursed verse aloud. Days later, he was found dead in his chambers, his body nearly unrecognizable. His face was frozen in a horrific expression, as though he had died in the grip of something unseen. But what struck the monks who discovered him was the faintest trace of a smile on his lips, a smile as if in his final moments he had understood something. He had become one with the verse, and it had claimed him body and soul. And so the verse remains hidden in the forgotten corners of the world, waiting for the next soul to speak it, to release its poison once more. It is said that the verse can never truly be destroyed, for it exists in the very fabric of the universe, a reminder that words, once spoken, cannot be undone. Do you hear it now, listener? The faintest whisper, tugging at the edge of your mind? The verse waits. And if you listen too closely, if you speak it aloud, the poison will begin to seep into your veins, twisting you, pulling you toward the inevitable end. But be warned, the verse will never let you go. It will never stop calling. The abbey was a place of refuge, a sanctuary where monks and nuns sought solace from the world, where they could dedicate themselves to prayer and reflection. Yet, not all blessings bestowed within those hallowed walls were of light and peace. There were some blessings, some rituals, that bound the soul in ways more sinister, twisting fate and bringing ruin to those who sought their comfort. The abbey's abbess, a woman revered by all who knew her, was said to have once performed such a blessing that would eventually prove to be its undoing. Abbess Isolde was a woman of great beauty and profound wisdom. Her presence was calming, her words always filled with compassion and grace. She had led the abbey through many difficult times, seen its greatest triumphs and its darkest struggles, and her reputation extended far beyond the walls of the abbey. People came from miles around to receive her counsel, and many said that she had a special gift, a gift for healing and for seeing into the hearts of men and women. But as the years went by, a darkness began to grow within her. Though she remained beloved by all who knew her, there was a coldness that settled in her heart, a yearning that no one could explain. The abbess would often retreat to the abbey's inner sanctum, where no one dared to follow. It was in these moments of solitude that she would pore over the ancient texts, whispering prayers that no one else could understand. It was during one such retreat that Abbess Isolde discovered a forbidden ritual hidden within the pages of a long-forgotten book, buried beneath the layers of sacred texts. The ritual was simple in its instructions, but terrifying in its implications. It promised a blessing, one that would bring peace and healing, a blessing that could extend life and grant the recipient eternal tranquility. But the cost, as with all things of power, was high. The ritual required the abbess to offer a part of herself, her very essence, as the price for the blessing. She would speak the sacred words, inhale the incense of ancient herbs, and press her palm to the forehead of the one who sought her blessing. The essence would pass from her to them, and in return the recipient would be granted a peaceful death, their suffering soothed as they passed into the next world. Abbess Isolde, desperate to understand the depths of the human soul and overcome the gnawing emptiness that had taken root inside her, saw the ritual as the key to unlocking the true meaning of life and death. And so, she decided to perform it, not for one of the sick or the dying, but for herself. It was in the dead of night that she stood before the altar in the abbey's chapel, the candles flickering low, the air thick with the scent of burning incense. She whispered the incantation, feeling the words vibrate in her chest, and placed her hand to her forehead. It was then that the blessing was given, not to another, but to herself. At first, the abbess felt a wave of warmth and peace wash over her. Her mind cleared, the darkness within her seemed to lift, and for a fleeting moment she felt as though she had truly touched something divine. But as the minutes passed, she began to feel a shift, a tug, a pull, as though something had entered her very soul, something foreign and dark. The power of the ritual was not what she had expected. It did not heal her. Instead, it began to consume her, to twist her into something she could no longer recognize. Her body grew cold, her skin pale and thin, her breath shallow. She was no longer the Abbess Isolde who had led the abbey with love and grace. She was something else, something hollow. The monks who found her the next morning were horrified. She had not died, but she had not lived either. Her eyes, once full of life, were now empty, staring blankly into the void. Her body was still warm, but there was no pulse, no breath. She was trapped in a state between life and death, caught in the grip of the blessing she had bestowed upon herself. Days passed, and the abbey's monks tried every ritual, every prayer, to bring her back, to restore her to life. But nothing worked. Abbess Isolde remained in her trance-like state, neither alive nor dead, her spirit lost in the liminal space between the two worlds. It wasn't long before the other monks began to notice a strange change in the abbey. The air grew heavy, the yaori walls seemed to close in, and the very ground beneath them felt as though it were slowly shifting. The monks grew restless, unable to sleep, unable to think. They too were beginning to feel the effects of the abbess's blessing. It was as if the abbess had somehow drawn them all into the same liminal state she inhabited. Their lives, once full of purpose, now felt empty, as if they too were trapped in a moment that would never end. Their bodies began to waste away, growing weak and frail, while their minds became clouded, their thoughts distant. The blessing, it seemed, was not a gift of peace. It was a curse that had consumed Abbess Isolde's soul and was now spreading to everyone around her. The monks soon abandoned the abbey, leaving it to decay and crumble, its once pristine walls now covered in ivy and rot. Abbess Isolde's body was left in the chapel, where she remained for many years, neither alive nor dead, her soul bound forever to the ritual she had performed. And though the abbey is now abandoned, there are those who say that if you wander too close, if you stand in the ruins long enough, you can still hear her voice, faint, distant, as if calling to you from the shadows. Come, it whispers. Come and receive the blessing. But be warned, some blessings are better left untouched. For in seeking peace, you may find yourself bound to a fate far darker than death itself. Time, they say, is the most relentless of forces. It cannot be controlled, cannot be stopped, and once it slips past you, it is gone forever. But what if someone could bend time? What if they could hold the sands of the hourglass still, even for a moment? Could a man cheat death? Or would time find its way to reclaim what had been stolen from it? In the shadowed abbey, the monks had their own ideas about time. They had spent lifetimes contemplating it, studying it, understanding its flow through the world. And it was here, in the deepest recesses of the abbey, that they discovered something far darker than they had imagined. The ritual was simple, at least in appearance. A chant, a song of sorts, a prayer to the forces that governed time itself. The monks had always believed that they could not alter time, but they believed that by aligning themselves with it, by understanding its essence, they could at least respect its power. It began with Brother Aldrin, a monk whose obsession with time bordered on madness. He was no longer content with the limited understanding the abbey's texts could offer. Time, to him, was not a river. It was a thread that could be woven, stretched, and knotted at will. His studies, increasingly erratic and filled with strange symbols, soon led him to an ancient manuscript hidden in the abbey's most secluded chamber. There he found it, the timekeeper's song. It was written in an ancient, almost indecipherable script, and it held no real meaning, at least not at first glance. Yet Aldrin, consumed by his quest, believed it held the answer to the one question that had plagued him for so long. Could time be bent to his will? The song itself was unlike any prayer the monks had ever sung. There were no words of peace, no cries to the divine, only a series of strange rhythmic sounds, vowel-heavy syllables that carried an unnatural cadence. When Aldrin first spoke them aloud, he felt a tremor in the air around him. It was a low hum, barely perceptible, as if the very walls of the abbey were vibrating with the song's power. At first, nothing seemed to change, but as Aldrin sang the song again, he began to notice something extraordinary. The air around him became still, almost too still. The ticking of the clock in the abbey's tower, which was a constant sound, seemed to slow, as if the very seconds were stretching out before him. His pulse, once quick, now seemed to beat in perfect harmony with the rhythm of the song. For the first time in his life, Aldrin felt in control, not of time, but of his own existence within it. He felt his heart slow, his breathing become more measured, as if the very act of singing the song had aligned him with something far older, far greater than himself. Encouraged by this sensation, Aldrin began to sing the song daily, each time with more fervor, more conviction. And with each recitation, the abbey seemed to grow quieter, the monks more distant, as if the boundaries between life and death were becoming blurred. The passage of time, once so tangible, now felt distant, abstract. But the price of tampering with time is always steep. The more Aldrin sang, the less real the world around him became. Days passed in a blur, and he found himself unable to remember simple moments, faces, names, the feeling of sunlight on his skin. His once sharp mind grew muddled, as if each note of the song siphoned away pieces of his soul. He could no longer tell the difference between the past and the future. His body aged, but it also seemed to stand still in time, caught between moments that stretched and folded in on themselves. The monks, sensing the change, began to grow fearful. They saw their brother slipping away from them, caught in a web of his own making. But it was too late. The more Aldrin sang, the further he drifted into oblivion, consumed by the very force he sought to control. The final time Aldrin sang the timekeeper's song, it was not with the purpose of controlling time anymore. It was an act of desperation, a cry for help. As he sang, he felt the world around him unravel. His vision blurred. The abbey around him faded into darkness, and for a moment he could not tell if he was still alive, or if he had crossed over into something else entirely. When the monks found him, he was standing before the abbey's great clock tower, his eyes wide and empty, his hands raised as if still grasping the song in his mind. His body had withered, as if he had aged 100 years in the span of a single moment. His skin was taut, his face gaunt, but his eyes, those eyes, held the same strange, otherworldly calm they had before, as if he had understood something that no one else ever would. Brother Aldrin had broken the natural flow of time, and in doing so, he had severed himself from it completely. He was not dead, but he was no longer truly alive. He existed in a state between worlds, trapped in the echo of the song he had sung so fervently. His body aged, yet his spirit remained frozen in a moment that no longer existed. The monks, fearing the consequences of his actions, abandoned the abbey. They sealed the door to the clock tower, and the timekeeper's song was buried with Aldrin's memory, never to be spoken of again. The abbey fell into ruin, as though time itself had turned its back on it. And yet, in the stillness of the night, if you listen carefully, you may hear it. The faintest hum, the softest melody, carried on, the wind. It is the song, the timekeeper's song lingering in the air, waiting for someone else to hear it, to feel its pull, to be consumed by its power. But be warned, listener, time is not a gift to be played with. It is a force far older than you, far more powerful, and if you seek to control it, it will consume you whole just as it consumed Aldrin. Have you ever wondered what happens when time itself is woven into something else, something tangible, something that binds it all together? Imagine, if you will, a tapestry, each thread representing a moment of time, each knot a choice, a life lived, a breath taken. The monks of the abbey, in their tireless devotion to understanding the mysteries of existence, believed that time could be woven, as easily as one might weave fabric. But as with all things related to life and death, there is a price, a dark, terrible price. In a secluded corner of the abbey's library, hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten manuscripts, there was a peculiar relic, an unfinished tapestry, so intricately woven that it seemed to shimmer with the very essence of life. The monks who first found it believed it was a work of divine creation. The tapestry depicted scenes from the lives of the monks who had come before, their moments of prayer, devotion, and contemplation, captured in exquisite detail. But there was something off, something unsettling about it. The abbey's weaver, a man named Brother Martin, became obsessed with the tapestry. He was not content to simply admire it. He longed to understand its true purpose. His hands, once steady and sure, became consumed by the task of finishing the tapestry. He believed that by completing it, he could unlock the secrets of life and death, the very mysteries that the monks had spent centuries trying to decipher. Each thread, he believed, represented a life that could be altered, stretched, or shortened, depending on the weaver's will. The tapestry itself was not just a picture, it was a map, a blueprint for existence. The monks who had woven it had unknowingly left their own fates embedded in the fabric. To complete the tapestry, Brother Martin believed, was to control time itself. But he could not have known what he was truly dealing with. As he worked, day and night, he began to see changes. The once vibrant threads that he added seemed to glow, to pulse with life. His hands moved with an unnatural speed, as if the very act of weaving had caused time to bend around him. And soon, it wasn't just the tapestry that changed. The abbey itself began to shift, as if the very walls were reacting to his work. It was during this time that Brother Martin began to notice the subtle, insidious effects of the tapestry. As he wove, he would find himself experiencing strange flashes of the past, moments that didn't belong to him, memories of monks long gone. He would see their faces in the shadows, hear their whispers in the wind. The more he wove, the more he became entwined with the tapestry's threads. He could feel their lives bleeding into his own, each moment they had lived becoming a part of him, their choices, their regrets, all sewn together. But with each thread he added, Brother Martin grew weaker. His body, once strong and healthy, began to wither. He felt as though the tapestry was draining him, taking something vital with every knot, every stitch. His skin grew pale, his bones brittle, but still he could not stop. He was driven, compelled to finish the tapestry, to complete the cycle. He believed that by doing so, he could transcend death itself, become something more than mortal. He would be the weaver of life and death. Nothing could bind him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Brother Martin reached the final thread. It was a thread of pure gold, delicate and luminous, a thread unlike any he had ever seen. As he wove it into place, something stirred deep within the abbey, a shudder that rippled through the walls, a low hum that filled the air. The tapestry, now complete, seemed to come alive. The figures within it moved, their eyes flickering with a strange light. The faces of the monks who had long since passed appeared before him, their expressions twisted in horror. The last thread was more than just a symbolic completion. It was the final binding, the final act that tied the tapestry to the very fabric of existence. As the final knot was made, Brother Martin felt his soul tear away from his body. The tapestry had not simply woven the past and the present together. It had begun to unravel the very nature of time itself. He tried to pull away, to break free, but it was too late. The tapestry had him now. His body disintegrated, turning to dust, his soul absorbed into the intricate weave. And as it did, the abbey, the monks, the prayers, the very air, fell into silence. The tapestry, completed but at a terrible cost, hung still, its threads shimmering with the essence of countless lives. In the years that followed, the abbey was abandoned. The tapestry remained, hanging in the dim light of the chapel, its threads now dull and lifeless. But some say that on certain nights when the wind howls through the crumbling walls, the tapestry begins to glow again. They say you can hear the whispers of the monks, their voices carried on the breeze, as if the tapestry is still alive, still binding time to itself, still weaving the threads of fate. There are those who believe that if you stand before the tapestry and stare long enough, you may see your own face reflected in its threads. Perhaps you too will become part of its weave. Perhaps, just like Brother Martin, you will find yourself bound to the tapestry, your life, your very essence woven into the fabric of time. But be warned, listener. Time is a thread that cannot be unraveled. It is a force that cannot be contained, no matter how tightly it is bound. And once you've become part of the tapestry, you may never find your way out. The call to pilgrimage is a sacred one. To journey, to seek, to walk the path that leads to enlightenment or salvation. Such is the foundation of many faiths. But what if the pilgrimage itself was not a path to peace, but a road that leads to endless suffering, with no destination in sight? In the quiet corners of the world, there exist tales of a pilgrimage so powerful, so consuming, that those who embark upon it are bound to walk it forever. This is the tale of that pilgrimage, and of the monks who, in their desperate search for eternal life, fell prey to a ritual that would stretch their lives in ways they never intended. The origins of this pilgrimage are shrouded in mystery. Some say it began in the farthest reaches of the east, where the mountains are so high that they seem to touch the heavens, and where the air is thick with the scent of incense. Others claim it started in a forgotten desert, where the sun beats down relentlessly and where ancient ruins speak of lost gods. But wherever it began, the journey was always the same. Pilgrims would begin their trek with the goal of reaching a distant temple, said to hold the key to immortality. The monks who led this pilgrimage were revered for their wisdom, their knowledge of ancient rites, and their ability to guide others on this sacred journey. The path was treacherous, filled with dangers both physical and spiritual. But those who made it to the temple would be granted the ultimate reward, an escape from death, a life that would stretch into eternity. But as, with all things tied to immortality, there was a price. Brother Lucien, a monk of great renown, was the first to lead the pilgrimage. He had spent years studying the sacred texts, searching for the secret that would allow him to transcend the limitations of mortality. He had read of the temple, heard whispers of its power, and believed that by reaching it, he could unlock the secret to eternal life. He led his first group of pilgrims, their feet weary but their spirits high, with the promise of immortality burning bright in their hearts. The journey was long, spanning years of travel, hardship, and prayer. The pilgrims faced every manner of danger, wild animals, harsh weather, and the ever-present threat of despair. But each trial brought them closer to their goal, and the more they endured, the more they believed in the reward that awaited them. As the years passed, Brother Lucian grew more and more obsessed with the idea of immortality. The path itself had become less of a journey and more of a test, one that had begun to consume him entirely. He no longer cared about the pilgrims he led. He cared only for the temple, for the promise it held. His mind, once sharp and clear, began to dull. His body, once strong and capable, began to wither. When the pilgrims finally arrived at the temple, it was not as they had imagined it. The walls were ancient, crumbling under the weight of centuries. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. And yet something in the temple seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as though it was alive, waiting for them. Inside, the monks found a single large altar. Upon it lay a sacred stone, marked with strange symbols, and surrounded by candles that burned with an unnatural flame. Brother Lucian, now frail and weak, approached the altar, his heart filled with both dread and longing. He believed that this was the moment he had been waiting for, that this stone held the key to eternal life. He spoke the words that had been passed down through generations, a chant that he had memorized in the quiet of his monastery. The pilgrims watched in silence as the ritual unfolded. But as the last words left Brother Lucian's lips, something happened, something unexpected. The stone did not glow with divine light. It did not grant them the immortality they had hoped for. Instead, it unleashed a curse upon them, one that none could have foreseen. The pilgrims who had followed Brother Lucian were struck by a terrible force, their bodies beginning to wither and decay before their eyes. But it was not death that claimed them. No, it was something far worse. They were cursed to live forever, trapped in a state of perpetual pilgrimage. They could never reach their destination, never find the peace they sought. Every time they took a step, the temple moved farther away. Every time they thought they had reached the end of their journey, the path would stretch out before them, leading them further into the unknown. Brother Lucian, too, found himself trapped in this endless cycle. His body grew older with each passing year, yet he could not die. His mind, once filled with clarity and purpose, became clouded with despair. He had thought that immortality would be a gift, a release from the grasp of death, but instead it was a prison, a never-ending march toward a goal that could never be reached. And so the pilgrims wander, still searching for the temple that promises eternal life, still trapped in a cycle they can never escape. They are seen now only as shadows, ghostly figures who walk the earth, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. Some say they still appear in the desolate places of the world, on mountain paths or at the edge of forgotten deserts. And if you listen closely, you can hear their whispers, the faintest trace of their chant, carried on the wind. But be warned, listener, the eternal pilgrimage is not one that can be undertaken lightly. For if you take the first step, you may never stop. And like Brother Lucian, you may find yourself bound to a path that leads to nowhere, trapped forever in the curse of the endless journey. There is a deep, ancient magic in the air when a secret is kept, when knowledge is deliberately hidden from the world. In the abbey, where silence was held in reverence and sacred rites were performed in the deepest of secrecy, there was one chant, a chant so forbidden that even the elders of the abbey dared not speak it aloud. It was a chant older than the monastery itself, passed down through generations, whispered only in the most sacred, secluded places. This chant, like all forbidden things, was steeped in mystery and power, wrapped in layers of secrecy and danger. It was said to have the ability to unlock the deepest parts of the soul, to reveal the true nature of existence, and, most terrifying of all, to summon the spirits of those long dead. Those who had come before were often said to have disappeared. After hearing it, their lives claimed not by time, but by something else, something much darker. The chant, however, was not just a means of communication with the dead. It was a tool, one that could manipulate the very fabric of life itself, bending it to the will of the speaker. But the cost, the cost, was a heavy one. To utter the words of the forbidden chant was to invite death, but not an ordinary death. No, it was a death in which the speaker would be bound to the underworld, to the spirits they had awakened. Brother Amen was the first to truly understand the power of the chant. He had always been curious about the unknown, drawn to the mysteries that lurked in the shadows. He had heard the stories of the elders, their warnings, their hushed voices, but the temptation of the forbidden knowledge proved too strong for him to resist. He was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. It was in the Abbey's library that he first found the ancient manuscript. It was bound in dark leather, its pages yellowed with age, its writing a cryptic series of symbols that seemed to shimmer as if alive. The words were ancient, forgotten, and in his youth, Brother Amen believed he could decipher them, unravel their meaning. The elder monks had warned him, of course, telling him that the chant was to be left undisturbed, that no good could come of it. They spoke of the curse it carried, of the spirits it could summon, of the price that had been paid by those who had dared to speak it. But Brother Amen, filled with a thirst for knowledge that could not be quenched, ignored their warnings. He had to know. He began to study the manuscript in secret, memorizing the words one by one. The chant, when spoken, was said to draw the power of the earth itself, of the spirits of the dead, to open the gate between worlds. But Brother Amen was not prepared for what happened when he finally spoke the words aloud. As soon as the chant left his lips, a chill swept through the room. The air thickened, the shadows deepened, and the very walls of the abbey seemed to groan. It was as if the very foundations of reality were shifting. At first, there was nothing, but then there came a sound, a whispering, low and indistinct, rising from the depths of the earth. It was the sound of something ancient, something hungry. Brother Amen stood frozen, unable to move, his heart pounding in his chest. He had not expected this. He had not expected the power of the chant to be so real, so terrifying. The voices grew louder, swirling around him, their words incomprehensible. And then, the air grew colder still, and before him, a figure began to materialize. The figure was not human. It was an indistinct shape, a swirling mass of shadow and light, its form shifting as though it were made of smoke. But there was something in its eyes, something that bore into Brother Amen's very soul. The figure spoke, its voice a haunting, echoing whisper. "You have called us," it said, the words reverberating in his mind. "And now you are ours." Brother Amen fell to his knees, unable to breathe, unable to speak. His vision blurred, and the shadows seemed to close in around him. His body felt as though it were being pulled apart, as though the very essence of his being was being torn from him. The chant, the forbidden words, had done more than open a gate. It had bound him to something much darker, something far older than the abbey itself. The figure reached out, its hands cold and grasping, but it did not touch him. Instead, it passed through him, its presence filling his mind, his soul, his very being. In that moment, Brother Amen understood the price he had paid. The chant had not only summoned the spirits of the dead, it had bound him to them. He was now a part of their world, caught between the living and the dead, unable to escape. The monks who discovered him later found his body in the abbey's chapel, his face twisted in an expression of horror, his mouth still moving as if continuing the chant. But when they touched him, they found that he was cold, lifeless, his body drained of all warmth. It was as though his soul had been torn from him, leaving only an empty shell behind. The abbey's elders, fearing the consequences of Brother Amen's actions, sealed the manuscript away, hidden deep within the abbey's walls. They burned the pages they could find, but they knew that the curse could not be undone. The chant had been spoken, and it would live on, waiting for the next soul to fall prey to its power. In the years that followed, the abbey was abandoned. The monks left, one by one, unable to bear the weight of the curse that had been unleashed. And though the abbey now lies in ruin, The forbidden chant still lingers in the air, waiting for the next person foolish enough to speak its words. If you ever find yourself standing in the ruins of that abbey, if you listen closely enough, you might hear the faintest whisper, the faintest trace of a voice carried on the wind. The chant, the curse, will never die. It will always wait for the next soul to find it. There is a finality to all things, a moment when the last breath is drawn, when the final word is spoken, and the soul slips away into the unknown. But some words, some mantras, are not meant to end. They linger, echoing in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to return, to claim the souls of those foolish enough to speak them. In the abbey, the monks had long known of the final mantra, a chant said to summon the dead and restore them to life. It was not a prayer for peace nor a plea for mercy. It was a command, a dark binding that could bring the dead back from the grave. But such power was not meant for the living, and the consequences of uttering it were far too great to be understood by mortal minds. Those who spoke the final mantra were never the same again. Some say they were never truly alive to begin with. The origins of the final mantra are unclear, buried beneath layers of time and tragedy. It was said to have been written by a monk whose name has been lost to history. Some believe he sought to undo death itself, to tear down the veil between life and the afterlife. Others claim that he was cursed, his soul forever bound to the realm of the dead after he spoke the words. But whatever the truth, the final mantra remains a legend, a myth that has persisted through the centuries. It was Brother Jareth who first found the final mantra, hidden in the deepest part of the abbey's library. The manuscript was unlike any other he had encountered, its pages dark and brittle, covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift as if alive. He could feel the weight of it as soon as he touched it, a heaviness in his chest that grew with each page he turned. The chant itself was not long, but its power, its meaning was incomprehensible to him. Yet, driven by a thirst for knowledge, Brother Jareth began to study the words. The more he read, the more he understood. The final mantra promised the resurrection of the dead, one last chance to speak to the souls lost to time. But it came with a warning, written in the margins in faint, hurried script. To speak this is to surrender your soul. Brother Jareth did not heed the warning. He had lost too much in his life. The family he had never known, the life he had sacrificed to the abbey. He was a man consumed by loneliness, desperate for a chance to speak to those who had gone before. The idea of bringing them back, of hearing their voices once more, was too tempting to resist. On a moonless night, as the abbey was cloaked in darkness, Brother Jareth recited the final mantra. His voice was steady, unwavering, as he spoke, the words that had not been uttered in centuries. The very air seemed to crackle with energy, the walls vibrating as though they too could feel the power being unleashed. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and the sound of whispers began to fill the air, soft at first, then growing louder, more distinct. In that moment, Brother Jareth felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. The voices of the dead, those who had long since passed, seemed to speak to him from beyond the veil. Their words were comforting at first, their memories filling his mind with visions of forgotten times. But soon those memories began to twist. The voices grew darker, more insistent, their words turning to demands. "You have called us back," they whispered, their voices thick with hunger. "And now you will answer for it." The ground beneath Brother Jareth's feet cracked open, and from the depths of the earth figures began to rise, shadows of men and women long dead, their bodies a twisted mockery of life. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, and as they reached for him, he realized too late that the final mantra had not summoned life. It had summoned something far worse. The monks who found him the next morning described a scene of horror. Brother Jareth was kneeling before the altar, his body cold and lifeless. His eyes, once filled with ambition and curiosity, were now wide with terror, frozen in the moment of his last breath. The ground around him was scarred, as if something had clawed its way out from beneath the earth. The abbey's elders, horrified by what had transpired, sealed the manuscript away, burying it deep beneath the abbey's walls, hoping that the final mantra would be lost to time. But the power of the words could not be erased. The spirits of those who had been brought back were restless, their souls trapped between worlds, their voices lingering in the shadows. In the years that followed, the abbey fell into disrepair, its walls crumbling, its halls empty. But there are those who claim that the final mantra still lingers, hidden within the abbey's ruins, waiting for the next soul to stumble upon it. And if you listen closely, on certain nights, you might hear the faintest whisper, a voice calling to you from the darkness, speaking the words of the final mantra. The chant, it is said, never truly ends. It waits. It watches. It is always waiting for the next soul to call upon it, to awaken the spirits that dwell within the earth, to release the curse that cannot be undone. If you are ever near the abbey, if you find yourself standing before its ruins, know this. The final mantra is not a blessing. It is not a prayer for the dead. It is a curse that will bind you to the spirits, to the shadows, to a fate worse than death. And when you speak the words, when you call the spirits back, you might find yourself trapped in a cycle of life and death, of haunting whispers and unfulfilled promises, and you will never escape. The final mantra has claimed its last whisper, and now the abbey lies in ruin, abandoned by those who once walked its halls. Its walls are worn by time, but the echoes of the chant still linger, hanging in the air like a dark mist that refuses to dissipate. Though the monastery has crumbled, its curse endures, waiting for the next soul to arrive, unaware of the terrible price it demands. And perhaps you are that soul. You see, the mantras, the chants, the rituals, they never truly fade. They remain hidden, buried deep within the earth, within the shadows of forgotten places, always waiting to be unearthed. Their voices are carried on the wind, on the faintest whisper of a breeze, waiting for someone to listen. And when they do, when the words are spoken aloud, they twist the very fabric of reality, binding the speaker to something beyond the natural world, something far older, far more dangerous. The monks of the abbey paid the ultimate price for their curiosity, for their desire to understand the mysteries of life and death. But in doing so, they unlocked something far darker than they could have ever imagined. The spirits they summoned, the very forces they sought to control, have woven themselves into the world, their presence lingering in the spaces between life and death, between what is and what could have been. And now the question remains: will you be the next to seek knowledge, to uncover the truth of the mantras, to utter the words that should never be spoken? Perhaps, like Brother Amen, you will find yourself consumed by the very thing you sought to understand. Or like Brother Aldrin, you may find yourself forever trapped in the endless cycle of time, your soul bound to a tapestry that cannot be undone. Or perhaps you will, like Brother Jareth, summon something far worse than you could have ever imagined, your fate sealed in the echo of a forbidden chant. But whatever your path, know this: there are more books, more mantras, more rituals, waiting in the shadows. They are never truly gone. They are always returning, always waiting for the next soul to claim them, to be drawn into the endless spiral of knowledge, power, and curse. So, listener, if you hear a whisper in the night, a call from the darkness, heed it if you dare. But remember, the words you speak will never be undone. The mantras will always return, and you may find yourself walking a path from which there is no escape. If your candle has not gone out yet, you might be ready for the next book. There are more books. There are always more books.